Well, hey there, and welcome to Wedding Planning Simplified. I'm Amy from Unmistakably You. I'm a wedding planner and an educator here in London, Ontario. We are not coming to you live once again today. It is a very busy wedding season and it's a lovely summer as well. So I'm actually spending some time with my family today. So if you have questions or comments, as always, feel free to post them in the comments and we'll respond, or you can email me, amy@unmistakably.you.com. We are, however, dedicated to coming to you every week, even if we're not live, to help you out with your wedding planning questions and comments and concerns. And so this July, because we are here in sunny, warm London, Ontario, we're dealing with all things heat related, how to keep yourselves and your guests cool and comfortable during wedding season. And today, our topic is keeping those guests cool. So, we're here to talk about perhaps an extreme weather pattern that gets overlooked. When you're thinking about backup plans for any portion of your wedding that's outside, it's pretty natural to think about rain. That's the most obvious one. Again, here in Southern Ontario, we tend to get a lot of that, although not this year. This year, we've been dealing with a little bit more moderate temperatures, although it still can get pretty steamy out there some days. So don't forget, when you're coming up with backup plans, alternate weather plans, that heat is legitimately a dangerous, potentially extreme weather condition as well. So make sure that you've thought through that and accommodated by making some plans in case it does happen to be incredibly warm on your wedding day. We don't want anyone getting heat stroke or passing out. So the first thing is awareness. You want to make sure that if there's any portion of your day, most commonly what we see is ceremony or cocktails outdoors, make sure that you let your guests know that it's going to be outdoors. This can happen in your invitation, it can happen on your website, it can be spread by word of mouth. Just make sure that guests are not anticipating coming to a nice air-conditioned venue if that's not the case. That way they can be prepared by dressing accordingly and bringing appropriate shoes, changes of clothing, cooling devices if need be. I want you to think about as well the most simple, potentially, way to keep guests cool, which is to try to have shade covering all or most of your ceremony or cocktail location. Now, that's not always possible, but if you have the luxury of having a couple of, let's say, ceremony spaces to choose from on the property where the wedding is happening, hopefully you can choose one that will be in shade at the time of day that the ceremony is happening. So I would suggest to you that within the week or two prior to the ceremony, you go to the site and you stand there at the time that the ceremony is planned for, and you determine what the best shade location is if there are multiple options. If there is no shade, then you can create some artificial shade for all or most of your guests. Things that I've done in the past, probably the cutest one is to have paper parasols or even maybe umbrellas to create some shade. You could rig something up with patio umbrellas. If you have patio umbrellas on stands, perhaps you could provide some shade to at least part of the ceremony or cocktail location. You could even get some 10 by 10 pop-up tents. They're probably not the most aesthetically pleasing thing on the planet, but if you are set on having an outdoor ceremony and you have guests who you know are going to be particularly vulnerable to the heat, I would suggest that you provide them with shade in some way, however that might happen. Now, unfortunately, it might not be possible to have shade for all or even many of your guests. So there are certainly some alternate cooling ideas that we can suggest. First, I would suggest that if it is likely to be warm, it's a good idea to encourage proper hydration of your guests. And you can do this through an infused water station or an iced tea station, or having bottles of water on ice in a trough or a bucket as guests arrive. Providing hydration is going to be a really, really great way to combat things like heat stroke and dehydration. If you are doing disposable cups or water bottles, do make sure that you have some unobtrusive recycling containers nearby. Keep in mind that whatever you're giving your guests will likely be in the photos of your ceremony if we're talking about the ceremony time. So do be mindful of whether or not you want water bottles in your photos, or whether glasses are appropriate to the location or available. It's, of course, more environmentally friendly to have glass, but then you'll have to have someone in charge of cleaning those up, obviously. So if you're going with plastic, just make sure that you have appropriate recycling containers and that they're dealt with appropriately afterwards. Now, if you are providing alcoholic beverages during your ceremony or really during any part of your day in extreme heat, do be really mindful that alcohol dehydrates, and you'll want to be cautious and encourage your bartenders and any venue staff or caterers to really be on the lookout for anyone who might be suffering from dehydration, particularly if they've been over consuming alcoholic beverages. Now, another way, aside from hydration, to keep guests cool is by providing some kind of a hand fan. I actually have a wedding coming up where they've ordered folding paper fans that will be placed on every guest seat during the ceremony. So that's certainly a way to provide a little bit of a breeze if one isn't going to naturally exist. There are also battery-powered fans and little, manual pump hand fans. Decide on the aesthetic as well, because that will probably play into things. I've even done handmade fans that serve as programs. So you can do a paddle style with one of those chunky jumbo popsicle sticks, and guests can fan themselves. The added benefit to that is that you can put your ceremony program information or, crosswords, word searches, fun little trivia facts about you as a couple. So it can serve double duty. It can keep them entertained while they're waiting for the ceremony and also help cool them down. There are a number of different styles of fans that I've done over the years like that. You could also consider providing some kind of water mister. So whether that's a small little spray bottle, an atomizer, you can purchase them at the dollar store very affordably. Depending on your ceremony location and your tech ability / construction ability, you could even rig up almost like an arbor or a pergola that has misters rigged into it where your guests could go for relief if need be. Obviously, we're not looking to spray our guests with a fire hose, but a little bit of cool spray, either on the back of the knees, the back of the neck, or just the face, can be really helpful. And we talked about that a little bit a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about ways to keep the wedding party cool. Now, the third thing that I would suggest is to be really mindful, particularly of those guests who are going to be very susceptible to the elements. And those are usually your elderly guests, your pregnant friends, or anyone with any kind of a chronic or autoimmune health condition that might be particularly likely to overheat easily. So I would encourage you to have an option for shelter if there's not shade or some method of cooling available at the ceremony or cocktail hour. So perhaps you might have to be accommodating and allow people inside the house if you're having a private property wedding. You might want to make sure that there's a space in the barn or the shed or the tent where maybe there's a fan plugged in. There's a nice shady spot for guests to go. So just be mindful that you'll want to have that option available, particularly for those who are especially susceptible to the heat. Now, just a word about tents. If you are getting married in a tent, there are all manner of things to think about. We've talked about how to keep tents warm in cooler months, but the opposite is true in hotter months where you'll need to think about ways to keep your tent cool. There are options that most tent rental companies will have, such as large fans that are either floor standing, or some even have fans that mount in the corner at the top of the walls to the rails at the top of the walls. So fans are a great option. Just be mindful of the fact that they do create some noise. So this might be an issue, especially during speeches. And obviously they require power as well. So you'll need to accommodate for that when you're running power to your tent, thinking about lighting and music and all of the extra things you need power for. Adding fans to that could potentially overload a circuit if it's already at the max. There are tent air conditioning units that you can rent from larger tent companies, and they serve a purpose, but I would caution you that they're not perfect. When you think about the way air conditioning works in your house, Obviously, it only works if the windows are closed and the doors are closed and the house is closed up tight, which might not be realistic, particularly if you have vendors coming in and out of your tent, or if you have guests going in and out of the tent to the washroom, if you have servers coming in and out of the tent to serve the meal. So it's not likely reasonable to keep the cool air inside the tent effectively. Air conditioning units in tents certainly, though, can take some of the edge off. So it's not going to be as cool as your house might be if you turn it down to 18 or 20 degrees, but it's likely to provide some relief if it is an especially hot day. The thing I would caution you about, though, that I never would have thought of until this happened at a wedding a couple years ago, is that if you do keep that AC cranked all day, trying to keep the temperature inside of the tent cool, and you keep the sidewalls closed, if you know anything about condensation, going back to grade 6 science class, if you've got very, very cool air inside the tent hitting those hot tent walls, you're very likely to develop a severe condensation problem. And we actually experienced this a couple years ago where the bride was adamant that the tent stay completely closed and she had the AC turned down as low as it would go. And it actually started raining inside the tent. So all of her table settings got wet. All of her stationery was wet, because the condensation was literally dripping from the ceiling. So that's just something to be cautious of if you are thinking about renting an AC unit for your tent. There's no insulation in the walls of a tent like there is in your home. So it's a potentially unexpected issue that you might run into. Now, as always, we encourage you to comment and like and ask questions and reach out and just say hi. So feel free to post a comment in the comments underneath. You can send me an email, amy@unmistakably.you. And I do look forward to connecting with you live again soon, although we appreciate your patience while we navigate this very busy wedding season. As always, reach out with questions. We'll be here again next week. And until then, take care. Bye-bye.